So
Yeah, go for it.
my name is Turquoise. I'm currently with Downtown Partnership. Rose is actually my manager. I got into homeless services, or I call them social services, in 2014 after leaving the military. Had a bit of experience with homelessness myself, but was able to get out of it because I was a veteran. So that's been my experience, just helping those who have been in similar situations.
Thank you so much, Rose. Or sorry, Turquoise.
And Turquoise just got a new position at another company. You want to talk about that?
Well, I'll be starting, thank you, Rose. I'll be starting March 1st at the LGBT Center in Hillcrest, helping unhoused youth. I feel like I've been working with those that are my age, and they're kind of like, you don't know what you're talking about. So in reality, the youth is gonna be who takes care of all of us. So I feel like I should be able to plant those seeds now and try and help those that are facing homelessness right now.
Yes, Turquoise is a rock star. So my name's Rose, and I am the program manager for the Unhoused care team, which has a family reunification program where we travel unhoused neighbors who want to go back and live with family or friends and can be supported in that way. And then I have a staff of 6 unhoused outreach team members, and they are on the streets of downtown San Diego all day, every day, dealing with all kinds of interesting scenarios. And so that's really exciting that I get to support them in that. I got into this in 2 ways. Just it's always been my passion since I was a very young child to support people who for some reason didn't have food. My family did that. They let people live with us. Like, it was just part of my growing up, and always questioned every spiritual community I was in. Like, why aren't we feeding the homeless? You know, like, why are we having a big building and not housing people? So it just was in me. And then I experienced my own unstably housed for 2 years after my divorce, and my daughter was 14, and I had to live with people and go through the social services system. And I discovered how difficult and insane, maddening it made me. You know, just somebody who's educated and thought I knew how to read forms, and they lost my forms, and they ran me around in circles, and it was just difficult. I had cancer at the same time, and it was just like really difficult to navigate. And I just thought, oh my gosh, this has to change. Like, I can't. Now I understand why people give up. So it just eventually stayed in my heart, and I started just doing it on the side, like just going down to Balboa Park and passing out food and water and talking to people. And then I decided to get a job in it, and then I've been able to move up because it's my passion and my love. So
thank you so much for sharing, Rose. I'm really excited to have you on the forum today. And then Ken, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. Well, good evening, everyone. Ken Opplinger. I'm with Domestic Violence Solutions in Santa Barbara County. We have 2 full-time emergency shelters in the county that in total have 75 beds. In addition to that, we have a Housing First program where we work with domestic violence survivors to sort of address all of the issues around getting them into first sort of a temporary housing situation and then the permanent housing. In addition, we have a job and life skills program where we're working with survivors on a lot of the issues that they need to be able to succeed in life. And then we also have 2 full-time clinicians to work with survivors, generally for the first 4 or 5 months after they get out of the situation that they're in, before we move them on to whatever their permanent counseling solution is going to be. The organization has been around for about 40 years now. It was actually started by Senator Hannah Beth Jackson and a number of folks here in the community who wanted to make sure that we had these services. We were one of the first shelter service organizations like this in the country. And so we continue to provide the service, and we're really happy to do so. I've been in nonprofit management for about 30 years now, the last 10 years in the Santa Barbara, Ventura County areas. And, for me and my faith background, it's important that we look at how we can repair the world, how we can make the world a better place. We call it 𝗧𝗂𝗿𝗃𝗀𝗃. And so, this is part of my way of making sure that I'm giving back and helping my community.
Wow, again, thank you so much, Ken, for sharing. A warm welcome to Ken, Rose, and 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏, and I'm really excited for all of you guys to speak today. So Ken, you mentioned something about housing first. Can you go into a little bit of that just for the viewers who are unaware of what housing first is, and how this approach can be supportive in ending a homeless situation for women facing homelessness?
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that the forum is on issues around women. I just want to be clear that all of my answers are gender non-specific. We don't have any sort of gender issues with the services that we provide. We take anyone who comes to us. And so I just want to make sure that that's clear from the beginning. So, for a housing first focus is to make sure that all the services that we're providing are helping people address the situation that they're in and get to the point where they then can be successful in their own housing situation. So it's, not only just things like helping them find housing, maybe providing some financial assistance to get them into that housing, to get them set up in that housing, but it's the background on that. It's helping them, maybe learn about how to manage their finances, what job skills they're going to need to be able to get a job where they can afford that housing. It's the case management that we provide on an ongoing basis up until they get into that housing, and then for several months afterwards to make sure that they can maintain it. It's sort of a whole suite of services that sort of get towards that idea that the first thing is to get the person into housing, into a safe place, and they can then grow from there.
Wow, yeah, that's amazing work. I didn't realize that housing first also included long-term care just after getting an individual into housing situations. So that was really insightful. Rose and 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏, do you guys have any comments on housing first approach?
I'll speak, 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏. For me, housing approach is something I've been introduced to, but I also think it involves a roundabout of case management. So I like that there is continued case management services, because you do get someone to a safe place, but how do you begin to reintegrate them to the world that they're going to live in? So I think first is great, but continued case management until someone is stable also should go inside with housing first.
Just logistically, so you guys know that all permanent supportive housing in San Diego has case management on site. That's part of their contract with the city or the county to get funding. So that's something that is really important and really necessary when you're coming out of trauma, whether it's domestic violence or homelessness. It takes a while to get your short-term memory back. So housing first is trauma-informed care. By for instance, it was a guy, but he wasn't paying his rent, and we know him because he comes downtown a lot, and the case manager reached out to us and said, Joey isn't paying his rent, like I'm gonna have to exit him. And so we were able to talk to him, negotiate a payment plan, kind of do like a group effort and work on this new way of paying rent, like how you're going to set your money aside. And so it's really a really cool experience that they're doing in San Diego now with that.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's, again, I had no idea that was part of the program there in San Diego. And something that you said, Rose, was, the trauma associated from leaving a domestic violence situation. And this is open to, Ken, Rose, and 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏. What are some things about domestic violence do you think the public generally does not know or understand? So the stigma behind women who choose or who stay in harmful relationships.
I got it. Oh my gosh. Okay. I was like, I'm because of my experience, I have a lot of energy around that. So I was like, I'm new. I don't know what I'm doing. So forgive me. So what domestic violence is labeled as is part of the problem. Like, we expect to see somebody with a bruised face, or like a police report, or like a very, very linear definition of, you know, what domestic violence is, where it's often very complex and very unseen. And I think that makes it more difficult for women in particular to get assistance. I know when I let my spouse and I split, he refused to financially support me, and I was a stay-at-home mom and couldn't get a job, and had cancer and had to get surgery. And so it took me about a month to realize, and I had even worked at a domestic violence shelter for 3 years, and I hadn't heard of financial abuse. And that was he was controlling me with finances, and that was abusive. And so it took me a long time to admit to myself that I was being abused, and that I had been married to somebody who was manipulating me. And that's a pride thing. Like, I'm a strong, independent woman, you know. I let this happen, and how did I get here? And so it took me down a deep road of depression and confusion, and how to get resources. There are no women's shelters available immediately in San Diego. Rarely. Like, there is one, like there's probably 5 beds a morning, and there's 1,500 people asking for it. So your next thing is like, well, do you have any domestic violence? And this is where I've been able to train my staff, and we talk about like help the other person understand that the domestic violence is there, and the resources are more likely to be there when you are experiencing domestic violence. And almost, I would say 8 times out of 10, there's domestic violence of some sort happening that women aren't even aware of. So just educating on what domestic violence is, you know, like, I didn't know if you blocked somebody from leaving a room, that's domestic violence. You are not allowed to stop somebody, a spouse or a partner, from leaving. If they want to leave, they can leave. You know, I didn't understand stuff like that. And so the education is really important, and allowing women to not feel shame for being caught in that situation is really huge. Does that answer your question?
Yes, yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And like you said, I think that when people think of domestic violence, there's, you know, the physical aspect of it, but the financial abuse that you were talking about, that as well, I wasn't entirely aware of until this conversation. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing. And then you mentioned earlier too that as you and your daughter were facing this experience, you said there was some trouble accessing social services. So how can the social services sector, you know, better support single mothers and their children that are, you know, at risk of facing homelessness?
I would say make the process easier. I know Turquoise and I can say, like, even when we try to call somewhere, they're like, well, nobody answered, nobody calls us back. For domestic violence, to get into a domestic violence shelter, it's a 24-hour at least turnaround of calling, getting interviewed, an 1.5-hour long interview. You can't go in person anymore. Then they talk to their manager, then they call you back. You have to have a phone, but if your phone was stolen by your partner, you don't have a phone. It's really, really difficult. So there really needs to be a place, a safe place that's like guarded or something, like just a really safe place that women can go and get that interview and get it done within a day, and have more availability to shelters. We need more shelters for women in general and domestic violence survivors.
Yeah, and I certainly hear, Rose, that you know, we pride ourselves in the fact that it doesn't take quite as long, but the steps you go through that Rose has described is exactly the same for us. And part of it is that in addition to making sure that we are protecting all of our clients that we're serving, so we don't have situations where people find out where our shelters are and then they can come and maybe you know, further victimize the survivor. We also have to protect our staff. We just had an incident about a month and a half ago where, in addition to our shelters, we also, as part of our portfolio, have an apartment complex. So we provide permanent housing to some survivors as well. And we had an abuser, even 2 years after the fact, find out where the survivor was, come on the property, break cameras, break the window to her apartment. And so these are all safety issues that, while we absolutely have got to do better to get people into shelter and to make it as easy as possible, that those security things, unfortunately, are just very, very important, and we've got to be mindful of those too.
Wow, yeah, thank you so much for sharing, Ken. That that is definitely a scary experience for both the victim and also those that were working there. That's yeah, thank you so much for sharing. It's very tough. And in the situation with, and this is again open for anyone to respond, I think that when we think of finding help, or for a victim to find help in a situation like this, law enforcement is something that comes up, but there are many situations where individuals may not feel comfortable talking or calling law enforcement. What are some ways and preventative and protective measures that can be in place besides calling law enforcement? And again, this is open up to anyone.
Well, there's certainly steps that people can take. I mean, that as people call our crisis line and engage with us on the situation that they're in, especially for intimate partner violence that is currently underway, we really encourage people to leave and to come into shelter. And so we spend a lot of our time in those areas and trying to get people out of the situation so they can get into a safe place, and then begin the process of sort of trying to determine, okay, what are my next steps? What is it that I want to do? How can I build a safety plan to ensure that I don't put myself into the situation again? But it's difficult to do those things until we can get the person out of the situation. And so that's where we put a lot of our emphasis is helping them. We don't push, we don't, it really has to be their decision, but helping them make the decision that it's time to leave, and then facilitating in the best way possible, getting them, bringing them into shelter, and making sure then they can do what they have to do from there.
Yeah, that sounds, that makes sense. Thank you for sharing. And then, a lot of times, not to generalize, but shelters and housing programs, tend to themselves be unsafe for women trying to access housing. And, 𝗧𝗂𝗏𝗏 and Rose working in this sector, how do you think we can make these shelters and housing programs safer for women? Does that include better training, gender-specific programs? What are your opinions on that?
I think the city is starting to separate groups like the 55 and older and those that have DV. So I think a lot of times if you focus on putting people in specific groups, that the resources tend to be, if you have a DV shelter and all the resources are dedicated to DV, then it's nice to put people there that have DV or have an option of a 55, or just the options of resources. I think is a good way to kind of not nip it in the bud, but to get a better grasp on it.
I should just note that, there are, I'm sure Rose and 𝗧𝗂𝗏𝗏 can speak to this as well, there's a lot of difference between sort of the standard homeless shelter that you're going to find in a community and what a DV shelter looks like. The DV shelter generally is private rooms. It's in a place that is secret, that you can't actually just drive to. You have to be brought there. There's much more security. So there's things that, because of the situation the person is in with domestic violence, where the shelter is just a sort of a different animal than what you'd look at for standard homeless shelters. You don't have sort of the larger room with a bunch of beds in it. It's much more private and oriented individually to the person that comes in and to their families, because half the folks that we have coming into our shelters are bringing kids with them as well. So.
So I was thinking of that, like DV shelters have their own rooms, and I just think emergency shelters were never meant to last more than a couple weeks. I mean, they were supposed to be a short-term interim thing that turned into people live there for years. And we really need to change the mindset of emergency shelters being an option even. We need to do diversion. Like, we need to get people into housing and stop with the idea that a shelter is a place to live. Because most women have experienced some form of violence in their life, whether it be sexual abuse as a child or physical violence in a relationship or parental violence. Most women have experienced violence, and to be in a shelter that is 20, 40, 50, 120 women. Diane, I worked with Diane at 𝗧𝗲𝗴𝗶𝘀𝗲, so I see you're nodding like, yeah. To be in a shelter without your own space is really traumatizing, re-traumatizing. And to hear somebody with mental health issues next to you shouting like, from a nightmare, and you're the one who was hit as a child, like, you are not going to be able to think straight. You're not going to be able to remember to take your meds if you need to. You're not going to be able to sleep at night. So if you need to find a job, it's going to be harder. So it's really important that we try to get out of the mindset that shelters are a wise decision or a good decision for women in particular, but for anyone.
I have so much to say.
Go ahead, Diane. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. My name's Diane Richie. I'm the supervisor at 𝗧𝗲𝗴𝗪𝗏. I supervise 28 beds for single women. And definitely what Rose is saying, it's so true. The way it's set up here is we have 2 women to a room, and it's so true. Like, some of the women that come in here that have DV, they get re-traumatized because, like what Rose was mentioning, the person that's sleeping next to them is waking up in the middle of the night, is screaming and yelling, or who's violent themselves, right? So what we've been trying to do in our team is we've been definitely using diversion methods, and we first find out, is it safe for you to go back to other family members? And so we really focus on that, because we just know the longer they stay in this program, the longer they're just going to keep getting, having that being re-traumatized. So yeah, everything you said, Rose. I mean, I was nodding my head. I was like, yeah, it's really not, a shelter is not meant to be long-term, but it happens. And I think the reason for that happening is, as we all know, that the cost of living in San Diego is just absolutely ridiculous. There's not enough affordable housing. There's not enough vouchers. And what we're experiencing, at least what I've noticed in the last year, we have lots of people that are actually coming from different states to San Diego, and specifically to the shelter where wherever they came from, like that shelter actually paid for them to come straight to San Diego. So we're just getting bombarded with not having enough resources. And so for the program that I supervise right now, we have a lot of the ladies here are over, I want to say 57. And so we have, a lot of senior citizens, and the barriers that we're coming across is we can't refer them to employment because some of them are 77, 75, and, they don't have enough income. And so, yeah, I could keep going on, but back to what Rose was saying, definitely, a shelter is just not a place for someone that's experiencing DV. But when they do come here, of course, we don't turn people away. But once they come here and they come specifically to the program that I supervise, we quickly try to find a diversion method, because we already know they're coming to us broken, and they're just going to keep getting broken and broken and broken if they stay here. So yeah, that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you so much for speaking. Sorry, can you remind me of your name one more time again?
Yes, my name is Diane Richie. I'm at Father
Diane?
Joe's.
Okay, thank you.
Diane.
That was so insightful. I learned so much from that because I've always thought that, you know, a shelter is one of the number one places to go to. So it was interesting to hear that furthering care goes beyond just having access to shelter. It's, again, accessible housing, affordable housing. And then you talked about diversion care, and then Turquoise and Rose and anyone can also come in and answer this too. Can you go into a little bit about like what diversion care means and what that includes?
I will say for me, diversion is talking to someone and asking questions, you know, where do you have any family, or kind of seeing what type of picture that they're living, and try and figure out how you can help them maybe think of something they didn't think of. A lot of people don't think about going with their family. A lot of people don't think about going into this place. So you just help them explore more options than what they came with.
And then Rose, did you want to say anything?
It's basically what Turquoise said. It's a matter of trying to be creative with solutions. And sometimes you can say, well, do you go to a spiritual community? And, you know, does anybody, like an elderly couple, maybe have a room to rent that's not going to be $1,000 like they usually are? Are they willing to discount it for you because you go to their spiritual community? Just different creative things that, you know, do you have a roommate, like person that you would room with and that would cut the rent in half? And those are diversion conversations. My particular family reunification program is a diversion program. And so like Diane, if she finds somebody at her shelter that says, then she says, do you have family that, you know, could help take you in and get you away from here, get you out of San Diego? And they say, yeah, I have family in Oregon. She can call us and say, hey, we have somebody who has family in Oregon and we'll pay for their Greyhound to get home, and give them some meal cards and stuff like that to make sure they get home safe. And if we need to, we'll provide a guard at the Greyhound station until they leave and that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. I didn't know that was part of the extended care provided to a lot of these individuals. And then something Diane spoke about earlier was, you know, an increase in kind of older women coming in. So I kind of want to talk about this demographic and also touch on, you know, younger individuals who may be, I guess, you know, pregnant or having children with them. So what are resources that are lacking in the sexual and reproductive realm when it comes to both demographics, both older individuals and both individuals that I guess would need pregnancy care, OB care, or prenatal care?
So one of the things when you have gone through violence of some sort, as a woman in particular, but probably everyone, is that it's hard to trust people in power and people in authority, like doctors in particular. And there's a lot of gaslighting. There's a lot of research showing that women get gaslit a lot more in doctors' offices. And if you have any sort of mental health anxiety, it's hard to sit in a doctor's office. You have that white coat syndrome where you have, like, I don't know if anybody else, I just like have panic attacks when I wait too long in a little room, and I'm like, oh, nobody's ever gonna see me. Oh my God, you know. So it's sort of normal, and add any sort of mental health to that, depression, anything, not feeling heard, not feeling seen, not even wanting to, you know what's going on with your body because you don't have the energy or the finances to take care of it. Like a pregnancy, a lot of times women don't even want to know because it's just, that's too big of a problem. And so they might go for a very long time, if you're living on the street, without seeing a doctor because of all of those reasons. And so and getting reproductive birth control, stuff like that, all takes time and energy and transportation and mental health stability and all of that. Like, we don't realize how much goes into one appointment for somebody who is either 60% of people living on the streets are disabled. They are receiving disability income. More probably need to be. And probably at least 50% are neurodivergent. And so these studies are showing us that we can't expect the same things out of people who are struggling to survive and have all these other issues going on, and say, go to Planned Parenthood. Sure, just get on down there. It's not by a bus station. It's not, it's not anywhere near. You're gonna have to talk to 15 people. You're gonna have to fill out 5 forms and all of this. So my big push is we need street doctors. We need street clinicians. Like, we need the OBGYNs to go to the streets. We need family health practitioners to be on the streets with the kids in the tents and being like, hey, can I check on you? Let me see you right now. Like, just do it right there on the street. And then we can start making those trusting relationships happen more. So that's my vote goes for a street doctor. Any other suggestions from?
I think prioritizing an unhoused pregnant woman, because I know I have clients who are pregnant who have to wait for appointments, and like, it's a lot of work to comprise these appointments with no phone, no ID, no transportation. So there should be some sort of prioritization for them, since they don't have the access, that they can have continued services and be at least put in a sooner date than after having a baby getting help. So just making them a priority.
Yeah, I think that the thing for us is, I agree with everything Rose and 𝗧𝗂𝗏 said. I think on top of that, it's making sure that organizations like mine have the staffing to provide that assistance. We don't want to just have our clients have to navigate all this and deal with all this on their own. We're going to be there to help them. We're going to take them to the appointment. If they have questions, we're going to help them fill out the paperwork. Every single one of our staff is bilingual, English, Spanish, and we have direct contact with folks who can also translate into most of the indigenous languages. We oftentimes have to help in doctors' offices because they're not going to have people oftentimes who can speak Spanish. And so it's making sure that we've got the person power to help with those clients when they're trying to go through and get the healthcare that they need.
Wow, that's amazing that Domestic Violence Solutions offers those services, Ken. And then thank you, Rose and 𝗧𝗏𝗏, for your thoughts on this. And you guys were talking about street medicine. That's interesting because I didn't even know what street medicine was until I went to UC Santa Barbara, and they have a Doctors Without Walls there. And now I'm living in San Luis Obispo County, and there are no street medicine outreach programs here. And there weren't any from where I'm from in Ventura County either. So it was really mind-blowing to me to realize, like, oh, there's not that many anywhere. There was one in Santa Barbara. And I'm sure it's lacking in a lot of different counties and spaces. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was gonna say, we have 3 in San Diego now. One is Father Joe's, who did a pilot program, and my favorite people ever. Their street team, yeah. And yeah, the things they deal with, like and then Healthcare in Action just started. They did a pilot program with Molina Healthcare, and they put on a second team because they have so many. So the hard thing is, like, my staff, I tell them to go to appointments with their clients. And we're one of the only programs that does that. Like, it was really big for me because of my own neurodivergence. I understand how complicated it can be when somebody's talking to you and you're just like on trauma and you're like, I don't understand a word you're saying. But I mean, we have basically 1,900 clients downtown San Diego, and I have 6 staff. So it's so hard, we just need more services, more people, more, yeah. Go.
Yeah, wow, that's incredible that there are so many services in San Diego. I mean, although it sounds like there's not enough people to provide all these services, but I just wanted to, so someone in the chat just asked a question that I'll go ahead and ask for Turquoise, Rose, and Ken to answer, and just want to hear your thoughts. So they say, I think we have a big downfall when it comes to DV services for men or those who do not identify as female or are gender nonconforming. So what are you guys' thoughts on this?
I will say in my experience, I haven't come across people in that population right now. So it's really hard for me to speak on the resources. But it not being, I don't, maybe people don't, maybe people aren't coming up and saying that due to any stereotypes or, you know, fair to say that. But I would say the same resources would apply for DV, like Ken said, for it's not gender, I guess, gender conforming, right? It's for anyone that is facing those unfortunate situations.
Yeah, so for us, about 8% of our clients, including our residential clients, identify as male. In addition to that, we do get people who are not cisgender. I think the numbers that we're seeing are far below what the incidence of DV is amongst that population. And so one of the priorities for us this year is working with the local organization called Pacific Pride in Santa Barbara County on making sure that all of our advocates have the training they need to be able to work with these populations. But frankly, more importantly, everything that we do in our marketing and we're out in the community is talking about the openness and inclusivity, and then making sure that our processes are open and inclusive. I mean, like I started off this evening, yes, the vast majority of our clients identify as female, and so almost all of our services are oriented towards that. But we have to always keep top of mind that it doesn't matter how you present yourself, we're going to bring you in and work with you, and we need to make sure that our organization is set up so everyone feels welcome and feels like they're heard and seen, and that the issues that they're facing as part of recovering from DV are things that we can deal with.
Yeah, I want to say, I don't think San Diego has a male DV shelter, which is sad. There should be at least a small one. And then I think there should be a separate LGBTQ domestic violence shelter, because there's a lot of that. There's a lot of LGBTQ domestic violence or family violence. One of the things too that's difficult is in particular for LGBTQ and women, is that family violence is not considered domestic violence. So if your parents are abusing you, you cannot get into a domestic violence shelter. It's only partner violence. And I really think that's a downfall by the community, that we're not opening to family violence.
Yeah, Rose, that's a great point. In fact, it's even more specific for us than that. It's intimate partner violence that has occurred in the last 90 days. And so if you don't meet that definition, we're still going to work with you. We just can't bring you into our shelter. And this is, you know, it's 75 beds for a population of 450,000 people. So we are per capita the largest DV organization in the state, and we still limit just because we want to make sure we have enough beds for folks who meet that very specific definition.
Wow, yeah, I had no idea that familial violence that was not under domestic violence. I had no idea that was the case. So thank you so much for sharing. That was super insightful. So again, I just wanted to let everyone know in the Zoom that if you have any questions you would like to ask, just go ahead and pop them in the chat and I can go ahead and ask our panelists. Or again, raise your hand. Oh, Martin?
Sorry, I couldn't find the raise your hand feature. So I have a question. So when I worked so I did case management for 2 years. And one of the things that I saw with a lot of my female clients was the exchange of sexual favors for safety, for housing, for just being able to get off the streets. And so my question is, when someone is in a domestic violence shelter or transitioning out of a homeless situation, who has gone through that experience, how can service providers, healthcare providers, just like anyone who's involved in these people's lives, facilitate that healing and assist those women to be able to gain self-esteem and dignity back? So I don't know if that's too big of a question, but that was mine.
I think that's a good question. And one thing we have to do is separate women who choose to do that as a form of income because they want to versus a woman who is doing it out of desperation. And not force any one person to feel like that's not, how do I say this? You know, everybody's got their own way through life. And some people it works for and some people it doesn't. And so creating an environment where it's okay if that's their choice is probably the first step of creating a what we would call motivational interviewing and saying, is this what you want to do? And if they say yes, be like, okay, then, you know, let's figure out how we can get you back on your feet somehow, you know. And I could say deep down inside, I'm like, oh my God, I'm gonna do that, you know, like, but that everybody has to have their own journey and be respected for that. And then if they say that doesn't work for me, I really, for instance, we had a woman who has 4 kids and she tried to get into housing and didn't work. And she said, I'm going to go back to dancing. And, you know, of course, my heart's like, no, don't do it. And she was just like, that's the only way I can make money. And so I said, okay, go ahead, you know, do what you need to do. But what are some other options if that doesn't work or if that feels uncomfortable after a while? And she talked about maybe going back home to her kid's father's mother's family house. And so we talked about that and that became an option. And we were able to talk about her going home and utilizing that resources. Again, a diversion conversation. And so really approaching it with care and understanding that this person is making the best choice they can and they really need to be honored for that. And then inviting them, what do they want to do? Then at that point, I know like all domestic violence shelters here, probably Kenyar's has mental health advocates and groups and all kinds of cool options that people can go to. If you're in the shelters outside of that, there's not very good resources. We have like Jane Weston here, and it's a lot of work to get into there to get help. So your best bet is you're a good case manager that really cares about you and listens to you and helps you process what healing you need and where you can find it.
Thank you, Rose.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, Rose. And then let's see. So kind of going off of this conversation, and this is open to Ken, Turquoise, and Rose. Anyone can answer this as well. You know, what are some of the main challenges that you guys have seen the homeless service sectors face to provide women, you know, who are facing homelessness, safe and dignified housing programs? And this is, so again, if anyone wants to ask anything, go ahead and put it in the chat, but this is something that I wanted to ask before we wrap up the conversation.
I'm sorry, Katie, can you repeat that for us?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So what are some of the major challenges the homeless service sectors faces to provide women facing homelessness dignified and safe housing programs?
I'm going to say there's just not enough resources. That's the obstacle. There's not enough resources. There's not enough service providers who are trained in empathy and who have trauma-informed care, so it's a mix of creating more resources, buildings, places designated for individuals to go, and also revamping the staff. Like you said, training and funding. Another thing is money. We all know money sometimes can be the hang up. So those are my barriers.
I agree. Same here. There's just not enough resources, and definitely I like what you said, 𝗥𝗏𝗄𝗧, is the trauma informed. I know, at least for my staff, I make sure that we have, you know, opportunities to attend trainings where it provides trauma informed. And another word that Rose mentioned earlier was motivational interviewing, because and then having a good case manager, right? Because at the end of the day, it's not our agenda, it's their journey, and we're just there to walk with them in that journey and to provide them the resources and to give them the respect that they have, just like any of us, right? So that's the approach that I take here in our program, is that I always try, and I model that for my staff too, right? Like, I don't tell my clients what to do. And I let them know I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm really here to like help you figure out, like, how can we come together in this partnership? How can I, you know, grasp hands with you and say, okay, let's look at this together. And what, you know, where do I come in to play to provide you with the resources? And then definitely the key is the trauma informed. Like, if you don't have that, then it's going to come out in your meetings with the clients. They're going to know that you're not going to have that empathy for what they've gone through, and it becomes truly your agenda in that meeting.
I'd also offer, we really need to change the face of unhoused neighbors. Like, what people's perception is that they are all drug addicts or they just don't want to. But every time I say 60% of unhoused neighbors are on disability, they're like, what? And it's like, we give people who are disabled just enough money to make ourselves feel good about us as a society, and not enough to live, because they're not working hard enough. We live in an ableist society, in a what's that word where you have to make money, and I don't know what our economy, I forget what the word is. I always forget it. You know, like, if you're not helping, get out of the way kind of economy.
Free enterprise.
Yeah, free enterprise. Yeah.
Survivor of the fittest, I'm thinking.
Yeah, survival. Yeah, it is. And we really have to change our mindset that we're here as a community, and when one suffers, we all suffer. And homelessness is about finances. It's not about drugs. There's movie stars that do drugs, and you go to their movies, and as long as they stay out of your way, you're fine with them. You know, you don't care if they're drug alcoholics, as long as they're cute and entertaining. But the people on the streets didn't have that one skill, or where that one audition worked out for them, and they have addiction issues, just like the movie star has addiction issues. It's just a matter of income.
Yeah.
And so
yeah, and then I wanted to add, oh, go ahead.
As I say, I agree with all of that. And the other resource thing I would throw in that I think we mentioned earlier is just housing in California. You know, 4 years ago, state government did a sort of a quick back of the napkin estimate that we were 2 million housing units short in the state. And that has continued to exacerbate over the last several years, even with the state trying to push local cities to build more housing and to take away a lot of the barriers that they put in place to housing being built. And so I think in the homeless space, more and more we're becoming advocates just for housing in general. You know, because the more housing that's, I guess this goes back to free enterprise, Rose, but the more housing that's built, generally speaking, means that the lower that housing prices are going to get, because you've got more supply out there. And so we all have to get more involved in making sure that we are doing what we can to build more housing, so that we have those opportunities for everyone. And the final thing on this in the DV space for me, I'll say, is that we still have issues around both cultural and societal norms when it comes to DV. And so the issues that folks who are survivors that oftentimes we see experience are being shunned by family or by other members of their community for speaking out about the fact that they were abused, and having to not only sort of rebuild their lives financially and get housing, but to almost build a new network because they have lost that connection that they had to the network, because in the culture that they come from, speaking out about domestic violence is just so anathema to what they do that they're essentially ostracized after. So.
Wow, thank you again to Diane, 𝗥𝗿𝗂𝗏, Ken, and Rose for sharing. That was super insightful. And a common theme I'm hearing is lack of resources, and lack of money. And again, that was a super insightful conversation. I learned so much today. And I just want to go ahead and and lack of training as well. And trauma-informed care was something that 𝗥𝗂𝗏 and Diane touched on earlier. Again, I want to thank Ken, Rose, 𝗥𝗂𝗏, and Diane for speaking tonight. I hope that the attendees of the Zoom learned as much as I did when talking. And then I think Martin wanted to say a couple of things.
Before we close out this forum officially, Ken, 𝗥𝗂𝗏, Rose, did y'all have any last thoughts you had on your mind about any of the topics we talked about, as maybe some of your own closing words?
I want to say thank you for asking these questions and for being here and showing up, everyone listening. I'm not sure what your particular job life is going on with you, but these conversations are so important and so helpful to be able to look at it not just emotionally but statistically, and realize that we have put our community members in a really bad predicament when they're leaving a spouse or a family or living on the streets and getting violated. It's inhumane of us to not care for our community sisters, LGBTQ neighbors of any sort like that. So thank you for being here.
Absolutely, and thank you for the work you do on the ground in our community and everything. So it's late at night, so let us all get some rest for tomorrow. But thank you again for being in this space, and I hope everyone has a wonderful night. Take care.
Good night. It's good seeing you, Rose.